Good morning, or is it afternoon? I think you realize I made adjustments to my presentation. And when you look at it, it's really the traditional sustainable use of wood in Zimbabwe, specifically referring to the sculpting sector of the arts in Zimbabwe. I think you can appreciate my background is not science. I don't want to claim that I'm a scientist, neither am I an academic. I work with arts, and therefore my presentation will basically be looking at how wood and the work I do impact on each other. In Zimbabwe, probably you realize I come from a body that looks on the arts in Zimbabwe, including sculpting. In Zimbabwe, sculpting is basically stone, but there has been a tradition of wood, especially from the western part of our country, where most of the wood sculpting is practiced. And I think some of the issues that were being discussed in terms of its impact on the sustainable use of wood are also quite pertinent. So you will realize I'm just, the initial part was just to give you who we are as an organization and what we do. But I think the most interesting part is that in our country, wood is controlled by different organizations for its sustainable use. We believe as a country wood is an important resource that needs a lot of protection, and so a lot of instruments are there to ensure that the artist in particular can use it sustainably, and we can be able to ensure that posterity has the resource. You also realize that in our country, you can't cut wood legally. And most of our artists have to use dry, or if they have to cut at all, then it will be under the supervision of those that are in control of wood. I think you also realize that a lot of wood in our country is used by various institutions. For example, we are a tobacco producing country, and tobacco uses a lot of wood. And legally, they have to ensure that they replant, and every time they buy tobacco seedlings, they have to plant 0.1 hectare of the amount of land they are using for tobacco. So it's very important, and it's also meant to ensure wood remains available. Of course, this is common knowledge when you look at, in my country, those who use this wood, the major users, I think you look, wood carving becomes one of them. Because there's a lot of tourism, especially in the Western. For those that have been to Zimbabwe, that's where you also find the Victoria Falls, and massive tourism comes to that part of the country. And so our wood carvers also take advantage because most of it is now for commercial use, and people do it for sustainable living. But on the other hand, we need also to protect the forest. So when you now look at how one looks at wood and its importance, is one of the commonest, and I think someone was here earlier talked about the statistics of the availability of wood. So is in my country. I think a lot of land is still populated by wood, but in the last 10 years, because of challenges more so in energy, hydro, which we depend on, there has been quite a lot of wood use, and people were using wood as a source of energy, and a lot of trees were cut, especially around urban centers. A lot of trees have been cut, and that has affected, the amount of wood, and that has also put challenge on the monitoring of the use of wood. When we look at the main reason why wood and wood-based products are most important to men, so you find wood is the universal product. This has also been mentioned. Wood is also abundant, and so it's very easy to get than other products. And you can use it, you can replant it, you can regenerate the wood. And wood also has been known throughout the world to provide so much over the century. Not only does wood provide food, it also provides the other things we know, energy and sculpting, as we have done. And when we look at some of the strategies that have been used, or traditional practices that have also assisted in ensuring that we continue having and continue providing sustainable use of wood amongst communities, including our rural communities. We have a practice, and I think it goes beyond our country, the totemism, where people are able to associate their clans and families with certain natural resources, including animals and trees. And that has tended to assist as well to ensure that certain trees and certain forests remain intact, because the people amongst those communities look at those places as sacred. And in fact, we also have sacred places where people cannot cut these trees, because cutting the trees from those areas or from a particular type of tree is known or believed to cause problems to the people. But obviously, because of urbanization, modernization, globalization, some of these practices are starting to be affected, and in turn is also starting to affect some of the sustainable efforts of ensuring that certain trees that are so rare in some parts of the country remain there. I think, in a sense, answering my colleague's question, how can some of these trees that appear to be quite threatened, how can we ensure they remain available to posterity? We also have practices in our traditional Shona culture, where certain trees cannot be used for firewood or even for certain sculpting purposes. You can't use that tree because of its traditional importance, and therefore those practices ensure that certain trees that may be so rare to get are able to remain available for posterity. And so are the rules of ensuring that our traditional setup is able to control and monitor the use of wood, especially for local communities. One of the threats in my country that really is threatening, even in terms of our sculpting communities, to be able to get the type of wood that they require to use for their day-to-day survival, is really what I call commercialization of the wood. Not that commercialization in its sense is a bad thing, but I think when it's not controlled and monitored, then it sometimes creates problem where wood and logging can be uncontrollable, and exports may not also be controllable. And when that happens, then you find some of our communities may then lose some of their forests. Some of the efforts that have been used in my country to ensure that trees remain available and people can use them, we have a program that we call the annual tree planting every December. December in our country, because that's when rains are there. I think this has been reasonably very successful when people are able to plant, and there has been a concerted effort to ensure that the planting includes indigenous trees as well. As you would know, most of the indigenous trees are the ones that are easier, better to use, even for sculptures or even for domestic use. People prefer the indigenous trees than the other type of trees. So a lot of effort has been also put in trying to encourage our people to plant indigenous trees as well. And we have also had the creation of woodlots. Most families are encouraged to have woodlots around their homes, and that has also helped. And we also look at the legal framework in controlling the exploitation of trees by artists, as well as sustainable use of the wood and trees. When you also look, we also have a program which we call Campfire in my country, where the local community, because one of the challenges that has been observed has been that most people may always feel that when efforts are brought to communities to try to sustainably use trees, they look at it as something that is coming from outside, and therefore they may not cooperate and ensure that those efforts succeed. I think an effort has been made to ensure that whatever benefits is accrued in the forestry exploitation, the trees exploitation, 10% of that remains with the community, and that will be used in terms of hospitals, schools, and other places, especially where communities have huge forests and beneficial trees that are located close to their communities, where exploitation becomes a competition between those who are using the timber for commercial use, be they sculptors or commercial users. Then part of it must remain with the community as a way of encouraging communities to also look for their after those forests. We've also had a new development in terms of our religious, from a very religious point of view, where you find some of the religious communities of our country would actually put a lot of value in some of the trees. So you find where they practice their religion, even where the area is devoid of forest, they would normally keep some of those areas, bushy, and a lot of that has now been encouraged, so that we are able to ensure that some of the trees that are being exploited can be kept. So a lot of efforts are being made to ensure that the people themselves, the ordinary people themselves, own the process, and in the process they are also able to use sustainably some of the timber that are found in Zimbabwe. Most of our artists who are part of the communities of our people, most of our artists are working from communities, and it is from those communities that we then get people using some of the timber that is around. I think I will end there. Thank you very much.